He fed her for 4 months, every single morning, coffee, a warm meal, a paper bag left quietly on a weathered bench, while she sat in silence and said nothing. His 7-year-old daughter drew pictures for her. He never asked for anything back. He didn't even know her name for the first 8 weeks. And then one Tuesday in January, 3 black SUVs rolled into the park, followed by 12 men in suits. And the woman he thought was homeless stood up, straightened her coat, and walked toward them like she owned the entire city. Because she did. If kindness this quiet can change 2 lives this completely, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Logan Carter did not think of himself as a particularly good man. He wasn't being falsely modest about it. It was just an honest assessment, the kind you arrive at after enough years of small failures pile up and you stop pretending they don't belong to you. He'd walked out on a college degree he couldn't afford to finish. He'd chosen a woman he loved recklessly and married her before either of them were ready. And then he'd watched that marriage come apart in a lawyer's office on a Wednesday afternoon while Emma sat in a waiting room down the hall coloring in a Peppa Pig activity book, completely unaware that her parents were dividing their lives into 2 separate addresses. He'd made mistakes. He owned them. He didn't carry them like a story he needed to tell people. He just carried them, quietly, the way you carry the weight of things that can't be undone. What he was, consistently and without much drama about it, was present. He showed up. Not perfectly, not always with the right words or the right instinct, but he showed up. At school pickups and pediatrician appointments and Saturday morning pancakes and all the ordinary, unglamorous moments that made up a child's sense of being loved. Emma was 7. She had her mother's stubborn streak and Logan's tendency to go quiet when something bothered her, and she was, without question, the single most important thing in his life. Everything else he'd built was arranged around the fact of her. He worked as a floor supervisor at Harwick Industrial Supply, a mid-sized distribution company in the outer edge of downtown Millhaven, a city that sat somewhere between gritty and revitalizing and gritty and still waiting. He managed a team of 11, kept inventory moving, dealt with the rotating circus of shipping delays and staffing shortages and vendor disputes that came with the job. And he was good at it in the way that people are good at things they didn't plan to do but discovered they had a practical talent for. His salary was respectable but not generous. He rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Crescent Avenue, kept a 12-year-old Honda Civic running through sheer stubbornness, and sent Emma's mother a portion of each paycheck without being asked twice. It was a life built on discipline and routine. Logan didn't resent it. He'd made peace with the shape of things, mostly. The park was called Alderman Square, though it wasn't a square and there was no particular reason to remember the name. It sat between his apartment building and the bus stop on Keller Street, a narrow strip of urban green, 2 benches, a fountain that worked maybe 6 months out of the year, and 3 old elm trees that had somehow survived decades of city neglect. It was the kind of place people moved through rather than lingered in. A shortcut, a brief patch of air between buildings. Logan passed through it every weekday morning at 6:42, roughly, on his way to drop Emma at her before-school program and then catch the number 14 bus toward the warehouse district. Emma usually held his hand and talked at him about whatever was running through her head, her current best friend's betrayal over a game of 4 square, the unfairness of bedtime at 8, whether dolphins were technically fish, and why her teacher was wrong about it. He listened. He answered. He was only half awake most mornings, but he'd learned to track the important details. He noticed the woman on a Tuesday in late September. She was sitting on the far bench, the one that faced the fountain, with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Dark coat, worn at the elbows. Dark hair pulled back neatly, which struck him slightly, because it looked like someone who still cared about appearing put together. She was maybe 30, maybe a few years either side of that. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't asking anyone for anything. She was just sitting there in the early morning quiet with an expression that gave nothing away. He didn't slow down. He noted her and kept walking. She was there the next morning, same bench, same posture, and the morning after that. By the 4th day, Logan had started actually looking, not in an intrusive way, just a glance, the same instinctive awareness you develop in a city, cataloging things that repeat. She was always there before he arrived. She was always gone by the time he came back through in the evening. She had no bag that he could see, except occasionally a small cloth tote that she kept tucked close beside her. She didn't have a phone out. She didn't read. She just sat. On the 5th day, Emma tugged his sleeve and said, "Daddy, why does that lady always sit there by herself?" "I don't know, Bug." "Is she waiting for someone?" "Maybe." Emma thought about it. "She looks cold." It was in the mid-50s, not dangerously cold, but the kind of damp morning chill that settled into you if you were sitting still outside. Logan looked at the woman again. She was wearing the same coat as every other day. He watched her pull it tighter without seeming to realize she'd done it. "Yeah," he said. "She probably is." He thought about it on the bus. He thought about it at his desk, in the background of a conversation about a late shipment from their Portland supplier. He wasn't sure what he thought he could do about it. He wasn't a social worker. He didn't know the woman. She hadn't asked him for a thing. But Emma's voice was in his head. "She looks cold." And his daughter had a talent for stating things simply in ways that made it impossible to pretend you hadn't heard them. The next morning was a Friday. Logan stopped at the bodega on the corner of Keller and bought 2 coffees, one for himself, one in a separate cup with a lid, and a brown paper bag with a sesame bagel and a small container of cream cheese. He wasn't making a whole thing of it. He just did it. When they reached Alderman Square, Emma was mid-sentence about something involving a boy named Marcus and a stolen eraser, and Logan listened to her while he crossed the path toward the far bench. The woman was there, same as always, hands folded, coat pulled in. Up close she looked more tired than she did from a distance. Not disheveled, but worn down in some interior way, like something behind her eyes had been switched to a lower setting. He set the coffee and the bag beside her on the bench. "Morning. It's just a bagel. I wasn't sure if you had anything." She looked at him. Her eyes were very dark and very still, and she held his gaze for a moment in a way that was neither hostile nor grateful, just steady, assessing. "I didn't ask for anything," she said. "I know." He straightened. "I'm Logan. My daughter Emma and I walk through here most mornings. No obligation." He took his own coffee and looked down at Emma, who was staring at the woman with the open, unfiltered curiosity of a 7-year-old. "Say hi, Em." Emma said hi. The woman looked at Emma for a moment, and something in her expression shifted, barely, just a small tightening at the corners of her eyes, as if the sight of the girl landed somewhere tender. Then she looked back at Logan. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee." That was it. That was the whole conversation. Logan took Emma to her program, caught his bus, and got to work 7 minutes early. He didn't tell anyone what he'd done. It didn't seem like something worth mentioning. He'd bought a stranger a cup of coffee. It wasn't a big deal. He brought another one on Monday. Basic. October turned into a rhythm. He didn't bring something every day. Some mornings he was running too late, or he'd forgotten to stop, or Emma was in a difficult mood and the extra 5 minutes wasn't available. But 4 or 5 mornings a week, he came through Alderman Square with a brown paper bag beside his coffee. He kept it simple. Something warm, if possible. Something filling. A breakfast sandwich. A small container of soup once when the temperature dropped sharply. Oatmeal with brown sugar from the hot bar at the Korean grocery on Harwick Street. The woman never asked for anything and never expected anything. On the mornings he came through without a bag, she didn't react. She didn't look disappointed or resentful. She simply sat there as she always did, and if their eyes met, she gave him a small, neutral nod, and he walked on. On the mornings he did bring something, the exchange was usually brief. She'd accept it without ceremony. Sometimes she'd say thank you, sometimes she didn't. Logan didn't keep score. Emma, however, had decided to get involved. It started with a drawing, a crayon sketch of a woman on a bench with a yellow sun and 3 lopsided trees pressed into the bottom of a paper bag, along with a cheese and tomato sandwich. Logan had only noticed it when he was already handing over the bag, and he thought for a second about pulling it back out and saying something like, "Ignore that. My daughter is 7, but the woman had already taken the bag and was opening it, and she unfolded the drawing and looked at it for a long moment. "Did she draw this?" she asked. "Yeah, sorry, she must have snuck it in." "Don't apologize." A pause. "It's a good drawing." After that, Emma started treating the bags like a delivery service. She'd fold in little notes, her handwriting still uneven and enthusiastic, spelling uncertain, but effort enormous. "Good morning. I hope you have a good day. Emma, age 7. A drawing of what appeared to be a dog, though Emma clarified it was actually a horse. A Halloween card with a lopsided pumpkin. Emma asked Logan once if the woman ever wrote back, and he told her he didn't think that was really how it worked, and Emma said she thought maybe the woman just needed more time. He didn't disagree. The first time they had a real conversation was on a Wednesday in late October, after a cold rain that had kept Logan at the edge of the park path with an umbrella, while Emma splashed in a shallow puddle despite direct instructions not to. The woman was on her bench with a folded piece of cardboard tucked under her, a thin barrier against the wet wood. She was watching Emma's puddle destruction campaign with an expression that Logan realized, after a moment, was close to amusement. "She doesn't follow directions well," he offered. "Most people don't," the woman said. "They just get better at pretending." He laughed. It surprised him. Not the observation, which was sharp and accurate, but the fact that it came from her, easy and dry and completely unbothered. He'd half expected her to be fragile. Quiet people who sat alone on park benches in the cold. He'd constructed a version of her in his head that was bruised and battered by whatever had brought her here. But she didn't sound bruised. She sounded like someone who'd noticed something true and was simply pointing it out. "Fair point," he said. "Emma." She said the name like she'd been turning it over. "She put a joke in last week's bag." "The knock-knock joke." "I didn't understand the punchline." "Neither does she. She heard it from someone at school. I don't think she understands what a interrupting cow is." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'm Victoria," she said. He looked at her. "You told me your name the first morning." She kept her gaze ahead toward the fountain. It seemed impolite not to reciprocate. Eventually. "Victoria," he repeated. "Okay. You can keep calling me the woman on the bench if you prefer. I assumed that's how you'd been thinking of me." He had been, roughly. He didn't confirm it. "Victoria works fine." November came in hard and gray, and Logan started bringing 2 cups instead of 1. He didn't make an announcement about it. He just showed up one Thursday morning with both cups in a carrier and set one down beside her and kept the other. And if she found it strange, she didn't say so. They drank their coffee in the 10 or so minutes it took Emma to finish investigating a particularly interesting crack in the fountain basin, and Logan discovered that Victoria talked in a very specific way. Measured, precise. Nothing wasted, but not cold. More like someone who'd learned to be careful with words, and couldn't quite undo the habit, even when she was being warm. She asked about Emma without prying. She asked about his work in a way that suggested genuine curiosity about how supply chains operated, which struck him as an odd thing to be curious about. She made observations about the city, small, specific things, the way a block changes when a business closes or opens, the microecology of a public park in autumn, that made him feel like she was paying close attention to the world, even while sitting very still in a corner of it. He didn't ask her how she'd ended up on the bench. He didn't know if it was his business, and she had a quality of self-containment that made the question feel intrusive. Not hostile, just private. There was a line somewhere she kept, and he was careful with it without being told to be. Once, in early November, he asked if she was doing okay. Just that. "Are you doing okay?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'm managing," she said. "It's temporary." "Okay." "You don't believe me." "I don't disbelieve you." He looked at her. "You seem like someone who knows exactly what she's doing." She held his gaze, and something in her expression shifted slightly. Something he couldn't name, but that felt like it meant something. "You're more perceptive than you look, Logan Carter." That's a compliment wrapped in an insult. Take what you can get. At work, the reaction ranged from tolerant to exasperated. His coworker Dwight, who was 54 and had opinions about everything, cornered him in the break room one afternoon after Logan had mentioned in passing that he'd been stopping at the bodega before work lately. "Is this about that woman in the park?" Logan looked up from his coffee. "Marcus told you." "Marcus tells everyone everything. That man could not keep a secret if you stapled it to his chest." Dwight sat down across from him. "Look, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying be careful. You don't know anything about her." I know she's cold in the morning and nobody's bringing her breakfast. And you feel bad about that. Yeah, that's a good impulse. I'm not criticizing the impulse. Dwight folded his hands. I'm just saying, you've got Emma. You've got a full plate. You start getting personally involved with someone whose story you don't know, things can get complicated. I'm not getting personally involved. I'm buying her coffee. You're buying her coffee every day. Not every day. Dwight gave him a look. Most days, Logan admitted. That's what I'm saying. Logan was quiet for a moment. She's not... I don't know. She doesn't feel like someone I need to protect or worry about in that way. She feels like someone who's dealing with something she doesn't want to talk about, and who mostly just wants to be treated like a person. Dwight studied him. And Emma? Emma likes her, sends drawings. You know how Emma is. That kid will be the death of your social life, Dwight said, but there was affection in it. He stood, picked up his coffee. Just keep your head about it. That's all I'm saying. Logan kept his head about it, or he told himself he did. December arrived, and with it the kind of cold that didn't apologize for itself. 16 degrees on some mornings, a wind that came off the river and found every gap in every coat. Logan upgraded the breakfast arrangements without ceremony, hot food when he could manage it. An extra cup, sometimes a second bag. He found a corner store 2 blocks from his apartment that did hand-wrapped breakfast burritos in foil that stayed warm enough if he walked quickly, and those became the standard. Victoria was always there. He'd stopped being surprised by it. She was consistent in a way that he respected. No matter what the temperature was, no matter how bad the wind, she was on that bench when he came through at 6:42. Coat pulled in, hands folded, watching the park with that still, attentive expression. One morning, she was wearing a scarf he hadn't seen before, heavy wool, dark green. He almost asked about it, then decided it wasn't his business. But he noticed her hands were still bare, red from the cold, and the next morning he brought a pair of fleece-lined gloves he'd found in the back of his hall closet. Too small for him, bought for a reason he couldn't remember, still in their packaging. He set them on top of the bag without a word. She looked at them, then at him. My hands aren't cold, she said. Mine aren't either, he said. Weird coincidence. She looked at the gloves again, a longer beat this time. Thank you, she said. She put them on. They were a little large, but she didn't mention it. Emma's reaction, when Logan told her about it that evening, was to say that the woman, Victoria, Emma had started using her name, was probably very sad inside, even if she didn't look like it. Because people who were sad on the inside often didn't look like it on the outside, and you could usually tell by whether or not they smiled with their eyes. Emma had read this in a book about feelings. Logan told her she was probably right, which was true, and he didn't let her see the fact that the observation had settled into him and stayed there. Christmas was complicated, as it always was. Emma spent 3 days at her mother's, Angela's new place across town, a nicer apartment than Logan's, which was fine. He'd made his peace with it. And Logan worked the holiday split shift and ordered Thai food on Christmas Eve, and didn't particularly feel sorry for himself about it. He'd learned that feeling sorry for yourself was a trap. You went in for a minute and came out 2 hours later with nothing resolved and a headache. He didn't go through the park on Christmas morning. He went through on the 26th. The temperature was 21 degrees. Victoria was on the bench. He stopped. You're always here, he said. You're always surprised, she said. I brought extra. He handed over the carrier keg. 2 burritos this time, 2 coffees. Emma's at her mom's. Merry Christmas, Victoria said, a beat late, dry enough that it almost wasn't. Yeah. He sat down on the bench beside her. First time he'd ever done that. Usually he stood or stayed on the path while Emma ranged around. There was no particular reason to stand. It was too cold to stand still and have a conversation. Victoria didn't move over or make it strange. She handed him his coffee from the carrier and unwrapped one of the burritos, and they sat there in the frozen December park and ate breakfast while the fountain stood still and silent in the cold. Do you have family? He asked. She was quiet for longer than the question warranted. Had, she said. He didn't push. What about you? She asked. My parents are in Columbus, we call. Emma adores my mother. A pause. My marriage was its own thing. Angela, Emma's mother. She's a decent person. We were just bad at being married to each other. That's an honest way to put it. Took me a while to get there. For about a year after, I was pretty convinced the whole thing was mostly her fault. He looked at his coffee. Turns out that's not how it works. No, Victoria said. It usually isn't. They sat in the silence of the park, which wasn't unpleasant. A pigeon was doing something purposeful near the base of the fountain. The wind had backed off. You seem better, Logan said. Then September. She glanced at him. Better how? Less like you're bracing for something. A pause. Maybe. Is whatever it is it getting resolved? She was quiet again. That particular quiet she had that meant she was deciding how much to say, running some internal calculation about the cost of information. Slowly, she said. Yes. Good. He stood, finished the last of his coffee. I'll bring Emma by after the new year. She's been stockpiling drawings. I assumed. She drew you a portrait. Fair warning, it's pretty abstract. Victoria looked up at him, and in the flat December light, with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup and the dark green scarf looped twice around her neck, she almost smiled. Not the careful, close-lipped movement he'd seen a few times before. Something more open than that. Something that seemed to surprise her slightly. I'll hang it up, she said. In your... He stopped. She looked at him. I don't know where you sleep, he said quietly. I've never asked. No, she said. You haven't. I wasn't going to. I know. She looked back toward the fountain. I have somewhere. It's small and cold and not what I'm accustomed to. But I have somewhere. He nodded. He believed her. Okay. Logan? He'd already turned to go. The fact that you didn't ask, that matters to me. You should know that. He looked back at her. Her expression was level and serious, the way she was when she meant something completely. Okay, he said again. He walked out of the park and didn't look back. And he didn't examine what she'd said too closely, because examining it too closely would require him to admit that it had landed somewhere important inside him, and he wasn't ready to do that yet. Maybe not for a while. January came in with ice. The first full week was brutal. Sub-zero wind chill, the sidewalks treacherous. The park empty of everyone except the city's most stubborn regulars and, without exception, Victoria Hart, present on her bench at 6:42 every morning, as if the weather were merely a rumor she'd chosen not to believe. Logan started stopping at the park on his way back from dropping Emma, which added 10 minutes to his commute. He didn't acknowledge this shift in his own schedule. It was colder. She'd been out there longer. It seemed like common sense. They talked more in January than they had in any previous month. Something had shifted after Christmas. Some formality that had been structurally present between them had quietly dissolved in the cold, and what remained was more honest, less careful. Victoria talked about things she found interesting. Not about herself exactly, but her thinking, her way of seeing. She had opinions about architecture, about city planning, about the way bureaucratic decisions calcified into permanent conditions that nobody meant to make permanent. She had a way of describing problems in structural terms, not moral ones. Not those people were corrupt, but that system created the conditions for this outcome, that he found both interesting and slightly unnerving. She asked about his work in more detail now, not small talk. She actually wanted to understand how the supply side of a mid-level distribution operation functioned. She asked questions that made him think about his own job in new ways, identifying inefficiencies he'd stopped noticing because they were so baked into the daily routine. Once she said something about vendor relationship management that was so precisely accurate he laughed out loud. How do you know that? He said. I studied business, she said, simple as that. Yeah, but that's not textbook stuff. That's someone who's been in those meetings. She was quiet for a moment. I've been in some meetings. What kind of work did you do? A longer pause. Corporate. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. It's complicated. Okay. She looked at him sidelong. You're not curious? Of course I'm curious. But you'll tell me when you want to tell me. She was quiet again. Then, You're a strange man, Logan Carter. People have said that. I mean it as a compliment. I know. He looked at her. I've learned to take what I can get. She recognized her own line. The corner of her mouth moved. The morning it happened was the last Tuesday of January. Logan almost didn't go through the park that day. He was running behind. Emma had decided that that morning was the morning she needed to tell him about a recurring dream involving a librarian who could turn into a fox in full detail, starting over from the beginning twice, and the timeline had slipped. He was walking quickly, Emma half-trotting beside him, and he came through the entrance to Alderman Square at 6:51 instead of 6:42, and he heard it before he saw it. Engines, multiple engines, heavy vehicles. He came around the line of elm trees and stopped. 3 black SUVs were parked along the park's service road, the narrow strip at the back that technically wasn't for public vehicles but that nobody ever enforced. Behind them, a 4th car, a dark sedan that looked like it belonged to someone important. Men in suits were stepping out of the vehicles. 4, 5, 6 of them, more, moving with the clipped efficiency of people on assignment. A woman with a tablet was already on her phone. 2 men in dark coats who had the look of private security, the way they stood, the scanning quality of their attention, were coming down the path. Victoria was on her bench. She was standing now. She'd seen them already. She was standing very straight, hands at her sides, watching the approaching group with an expression Logan had never seen on her before, composed to the point of severity, not the quiet restraint he knew, but something harder underneath it, like the casing of something that had been compressed for a long time. One of the suited men, 50s, silver-haired, built like someone who had been powerful once and knew it, reached her first. He said something Logan couldn't hear from this distance. Victoria said something back, calmly. 2 sentences, maybe 3. The silver-haired man nodded once, formally. It wasn't the nod of a superior to a subordinate. It was, Logan stared at it, the nod of someone acknowledging an authority they hadn't expected to be confronted with so directly. Emma had stopped beside him. "Daddy, what's happening?" "I don't know." The woman with the tablet handed it to Victoria. Victoria looked at it, for about 4 seconds, just looked, then handed it back with a brief instruction and turned to say something to the security man on her left, who nodded and moved immediately. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't hesitated. She'd walked into the middle of that group of power-presenting men in their expensive suits, and she stood there like she'd been waiting for them to catch up to her, not the other way around. Which, Logan realized slowly, she had. He stood very still. Victoria turned and her gaze swept the park, scanning the way she did, and found him. She held his eyes for a moment across the distance between them. Then she walked toward him. The silver-haired man moved to follow her, and she said something over her shoulder without turning. 1 word, maybe 2. And he stopped. She walked the rest of the way alone. She was wearing the same dark coat she'd worn since September, the green scarf, the fleece gloves he'd found in the back of his closet. She stopped in front of him and Emma. Up close, she looked different than he'd ever seen her. Not better or worse, different. Like something had shifted back into alignment that had been slightly off for months. Her eyes were clear and very direct. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't owe me anything," he said, but it came out quieter than he meant it to. Emma looked up at Victoria with enormous eyes. "Are those your bodyguards?" "Some of them," Victoria said. "Yes." "Cool," Emma said. Victoria looked at Logan. "I'm Victoria Hart, the real version." A beat. "My father built Hartwell Corporation. I run it, or I did before I had to step back for a period." She said step back the same way someone says underwater when they mean drowning. "There were people within the company who believed that with my father gone, they could redirect the corporation's direction in ways that served their interests rather than the company's. I needed to gather evidence in a way they couldn't see coming. I needed to disappear." Logan stared at her. "The park," he said, "was safe, quiet, off the grid in a way that mattered." A pause. "I had resources, but I couldn't use them without creating a trail. I had somewhere to sleep. It was a safe house, not the street. I wasn't starving." She looked at him steadily. "I want you to know that. What you gave me, it wasn't survival. It was... She stopped. What? He said. She looked at him in that way she had, direct, nothing hidden, and said simply, "You treated me like a person every single day, when you had no reason to and nothing to gain from it, and your daughter drew me pictures." Her voice didn't waver, but something in it was careful, controlled in the way things are controlled when they matter too much to let them run loose. I didn't expect that to affect me the way it did. Emma had grabbed Logan's hand without him noticing. She was looking at Victoria very seriously, the way she looked at things she'd decided were important. "Were you scared?" Emma asked. Victoria looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes." "That's okay," Emma said. "Being scared is okay as long as you keep going." Something crossed Victoria's face, fast, not quite hidden. She looked down at his daughter for a moment. "That's exactly right," she said. Across the park, the suited men were waiting. The woman with the tablet, the silver-haired man who had stopped where Victoria told him to stop. All of it patient, held in suspension. Logan looked at it all and then looked back at her. "Hartwell Corporation," he said. "Yes." "That's the Hartwell Corporation that..." He ran the number. He'd seen the name on shipping manifests, on industry contacts, on business news he half absorbed at lunch. "That's a serious company." "Yes." "And you're the CEO." "Yes." "As of approximately 20 minutes ago, officially and legally and without any further dispute." Her chin came up slightly. Not arrogance, just certainty. "There are board members who are going to have a very bad month." He nodded slowly. He was still trying to rearrange the last 4 months in his head with this information layered over them. Victoria on the bench, Victoria in the green scarf, Victoria laughing at Emma's knock-knock joke and asking incisive questions about vendor management, and telling him, quietly on Christmas morning, that the fact he hadn't asked mattered to her. "The same person," he said. She looked at him. "What?" "You're the same person." He met her eyes. "That's what I'm saying. Whatever you're going back to, you're still the same person who told me I was more perceptive than I looked." She was quiet for a moment. "That was a compliment wrapped in an insult," she said. "I know." A pause. "I took what I could get." The corner of her mouth moved, more than usual, further, warmer, and not contained in time. "I need to go," she said. "There's a lot to manage today." "I know. But She stopped, started again. "I'd like to talk. Again. Not in a park necessarily, though I find I've developed an attachment to this particular bench." She looked at him with a directness that was also, he thought, slightly uncertain. "When things settle. If that's..." "Yeah," he said. "That's fine. That's good." She nodded once, professional, practiced. Then she looked down at Emma. "Thank you for the drawings," she said. Emma let go of Logan's hand and, before Logan could do anything about it, wrapped both arms around Victoria's waist. Victoria froze, completely still, for about 2 full seconds, in the way people freeze when something happens they haven't prepared for. Then she put one hand on Emma's back, gently, like she wasn't sure she was allowed but was doing it anyway. "Take care of your dad," Emma said into her coat. Victoria's hand pressed, just slightly, between Emma's shoulder blades. "I'll do my best," she said. Emma let go and stepped back, and Logan took her hand and they watched Victoria walk across Alderman Square toward the waiting convoy of SUVs and tailored suits and corporate consequence, her dark coat and green scarf moving through the cold morning air, her back straight in the way he'd noticed from a distance on a Tuesday in September when he hadn't known her name. She paused at the car door and looked back once. He raised his coffee cup. She nodded. Then she got in the car, and the door closed, and the convoy moved, and the park was just the park again, cold and quiet and empty, except for a man and his daughter and a weathered bench and the echo of 4 months of ordinary mornings that had turned out to be something else entirely. Emma looked up at him. "Dad?" "Yeah." "I think she's going to call." Logan looked at the empty service road where the SUVs had been. "I think she might," he said. Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good. Her horse drawing was really good. I want to see if she kept it." Logan looked down at his daughter, and the complicated tangle of feeling in his chest eased, slightly, in the way it only ever eased around her. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." He took her hand and they walked to the end of the park and turned left toward the school, the same as every morning, through the same cold air and the same gray January light, and the day began. She called on a Thursday. Logan was at his desk sorting through a backlog of inventory discrepancies when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. He almost let it go to voicemail because he was in the middle of a count and losing his place meant starting over, but something made him pick up. "Logan Carter." "It's Victoria." A brief pause. "Hart." "Victoria Hart. In case you know other Victorias." "I don't," he said. He set down his pen. "How are you?" "Busy. Extremely busy." The background on her end was the muffled texture of a real office. Voices, the low hum of something institutional. I said I'd call. I'm calling." "You did say that." "I wasn't sure you believed me." "I believed you." He leaned back in his chair. "I figured the timeline was flexible." "It's been 9 days. That's not long." "It felt long," she said, and then seemed to catch herself. A small hesitation, like she'd said something she hadn't planned to. "There's a lot happening. The board situation is ongoing. Legal is... It's complicated, and I don't want to bore you with it." "You wouldn't bore me." "I'd bore you." A pause. "How's Emma?" He smiled without meaning to. "She wants to know if you kept the horse drawing." A silence on her end, then, "Tell her I have it." "Where?" "In my office." Another pause, shorter. "On my desk, technically. Don't tell her that, she'll become insufferable." "She's 7. She's already insufferable." Turned his pen over in his fingers. "It's good to hear your voice." The silence that followed was a beat too long for comfort and too short to be awkward. It was, he thought, the silence of someone deciding something. "There's a restaurant near the Hartwell building," Victoria said. "Nothing fancy. It's a lunch place. Good soup. I don't have much time on most days, but I have 45 minutes on Fridays, usually. If you wanted to, I don't know, talk, outside of a park." "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that. Friday, 12:30. It's called Senna's on Caldwell and 5th. I'll find it." "Okay." A pause. "Logan?" "Yeah. Thank you for all of it. I haven't said it properly." "You said it in the park." "Not properly." Her voice was even, but underneath the evenness was something real, something she was choosing to let him hear. "I'll say it properly on Friday." She hung up, and Logan sat at his desk for a moment with his phone in his hand and the inventory sheet in front of him, and he was aware that something had shifted in the weight distribution of his week. That Friday had acquired a shape it hadn't had 10 minutes ago. He picked up his pen and went back to the count. Protect. Senna's was exactly what she'd described. A narrow lunch spot, a dozen tables, good light from the front window, a handwritten menu board. Logan got there 2 minutes early and sat facing the door, because he was the kind of person who sat facing the door, and he ordered water and read the menu 3 times without retaining any of it. Victoria arrived at 12:31, which told him she was either exactly punctual or had been standing outside for a moment collecting herself, and he didn't know her well enough yet to know which. She looked different in this context. Not dramatically, she was still herself, the same stillness, the same directness, but she was wearing a structured jacket, dark charcoal, and her hair was down in a way he hadn't seen before, and she moved through the restaurant like someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room. The woman behind the counter looked up when she came in, and then looked again, and Logan had the specific experience of watching someone register that the person who just walked through their door was somebody. Victoria sat down across from him and said, "You're already here." "I'm always early. It's a problem." "It's not a problem." She picked up the menu. "It's considerate. My ex-wife called it anxious." "Your ex-wife sounds exhausting." She scanned the menu without looking up. "I'd go with the chicken soup. It's actually good." "You come here often?" "I used to, before." She set the menu down. The word before landed and settled between them, and they both left it where it was. I grew up 2 blocks from this building. My father used to bring me here on Saturdays after his morning meetings. He thought it was important to eat at places where people weren't trying to impress you. Smart man. He was. Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did, briefly. He died 14 months ago. Heart attack. No warning. No. It was fast. She looked at the table. He left me the company, his entire life's work, in my hands, which was what he always intended and which I had been prepared for years. And within 6 weeks of his death, 3 members of the board had started maneuvering. The server came. They ordered the chicken soup, both of them, which he noticed she noticed, and then Victoria picked up where she'd left off, as if the interruption hadn't happened. Richard Cohn was the worst of them, she said. He'd been on the board for 11 years. He and my father had a complicated history. Professional respect on the surface, deeper friction underneath. Cohn believed that the company's philanthropic commitments were costing shareholder value, and he believed that with my father gone and a 30-year-old woman running the company, he had an opening. To do what? To restructure, redirect, quietly hollow out the programs my father built and replace them with more profitable but significantly less ethical arrangements. She said it flatly, not dramatically. Just the shape of the thing, laid out clearly. He had 2 other board members behind him, and he had the company's general counsel who'd been feeding him internal information for months. So why didn't you just... He stopped. Fire them? Expose them? She looked at him. I tried, in the conventional way, through proper channels, in the first 2 weeks, and I discovered very quickly that Cohn had prepared for that. He had documentation, fabricated, as it turned out, but professionally done, suggesting that I had been making unauthorized financial decisions in the months after my father's illness. Decisions that, if believed, would have created grounds to challenge my fitness to run the company. Logan set down his water glass. He set you up. Before I even knew there was a game being played. A pause. I have a very good attorney. She told me that fighting it openly, immediately, would be a losing battle. The fabricated documentation was good enough to create extended legal uncertainty, which was exactly what Cohn wanted. Time, delay, enough noise to make institutional investors nervous. So you disappeared. So I disappeared. She said it simply. We had to let them think they'd rattled me enough that I'd withdrawn, given them breathing room. Meanwhile, my attorney and a forensic accountant I trust completely started pulling threads. She picked up her spoon, looked at it. I stayed in a property I own under a secondary LLC, a small unit in the Mercer Building, 3 blocks from Alderman Square. Nothing remarkable. No staff, no visible security, no pattern that could be tracked. And the park was where I went to think. She met his eyes. In the mornings, when I needed air and quiet, and somewhere that wasn't 4 walls. A pause. I wasn't expecting company. He almost laughed. I almost didn't stop that first time. I know, I watched you almost not stop. She looked at him with that particular directness, the one that had nothing behind it except honesty. You came back. Emma noticed you were cold. You noticed first. She said it plainly, not accusatorially, just accurately. You noticed and she gave you the language for it. He didn't argue because she was right. The soup arrived and they ate for a while in a silence that was comfortable enough that neither of them rushed to fill it, which was itself a kind of information. Logan had been on enough uncomfortable lunches in his life to know the difference. How's it looking? He asked. The board situation. Better than it was. The forensic accountant found the source of the fabricated records. It was the general counsel, which we suspected, but now we can prove it. Cohen's 2 allies on the board are already distancing themselves from him, which is what people do when they see a ship taking on water. She paused. It won't be clean. There will be litigation. Some of it will be unpleasant, but the company is mine and it's going to stay mine. Good. She looked at him. You say that like it's simple. It is simple. He tried to take something that wasn't his. He's not going to get it. Logan shrugged. That's how it should work. The world doesn't always work the way it should. No, but sometimes it does. She considered that. He got the feeling she was filing it somewhere, the way she filed things, careful and precise, nothing wasted. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "When you were sitting in the park all those months, you could have been anywhere. You had a place to stay. You had resources, eventually." He looked at her. "Why every morning? Why that bench?" She was quiet for a moment. "Routine," she said finally. "I've always needed a routine. It's how I function. I've known that about myself since I was a child. Without something to organize a day around, I become—" She paused. "Not well. Even a park bench counts as routine. Even that, a beat." And there was a quality to the mornings there, before the city started moving. It was quiet in a way I needed. She looked out the window at the street, and then a man started leaving coffee, and his daughter started leaving drawings. She was quiet again. "I want to be honest with you. For the first few weeks, I told myself it was a minor thing, manageable. I didn't need it. It was a pleasant interruption. That's what I told myself. But I noticed when you didn't come. I noticed it before I admitted to myself that I noticed it." She turned back from the window. That bothered me, that I'd let myself become dependent on a routine that involved another person, especially when I was in a position where I couldn't afford complications. I was a complication. "You were the opposite of a complication," she said. "That was the problem. You were uncomplicated in a way almost nothing in my life was. You came, you left food, you didn't ask for anything or expect anything or want anything from me. You talked to me like I was just a person." She paused. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Logan looked at her across the table, at the careful way she held herself even while saying something genuine, the cost visible in how precisely she controlled it. "Victoria," he said, "don't." I wasn't going to say anything profound. "Good. I can't handle profound right now. I have a 2 o'clock with the board's outside counsel." He nodded. "How's the soup?" She looked at him. One beat, then the corner of her mouth moved. "Good." "Yeah." He picked up his spoon. "It's good." They had lunch again the following Friday. And the one after that. It wasn't a formal arrangement. She texted him on Thursday afternoons, usually something brief. "Then is tomorrow if you're free?" He was always free on Fridays. He didn't rearrange his schedule for it exactly, but he also didn't let anything get scheduled over it, which was roughly the same thing, and he didn't examine it too closely. The lunches had a specific texture. They talked about real things, not performance, not social maintenance, but actual substance. She told him about the legal proceedings against Koan in careful, considered installments, not asking for his advice, but seeming to need the act of saying it out loud to someone who wasn't a lawyer or an investor or a board member. He told her about Emma, the full texture of raising her, the funny parts and the exhausting parts, and the moments that hit him without warning, like when Emma had told him that she thought he must be lonely sometimes, which was the most accurate and devastating thing a 7-year-old had ever said to him. Victoria had gone very still when he told her that. "What did you say to her?" "I said I had her, so that wasn't really right." "That's a good answer." "I don't know." She thought about it for a second and then said, "But that's different, and she's not wrong." Victoria looked at her soup. "She's not wrong," she agreed quietly. He noticed things about her that the park hadn't offered. The way she tapped her thumb against her index finger when she was working through a problem, 3 times, always 3. The way she laughed, which was real and slightly surprised, like it caught her off guard each time. She had a dark sense of humor that she mostly kept under wraps, but that appeared unpredictably, usually in the form of a single deadpan line that made him choke on whatever he was drinking. She was not easy. He registered this clearly and without judgment. She was guarded in ways that were structural. Not coyness, not a game, but genuine self-protection, built up over years of being in environments where softness had a cost. She could go cold in the middle of a conversation in a way that felt less like hostility and more like a door closing because the draft was coming through it. He learned not to push when she did that. He just waited, and usually she came back. He also noticed she was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, the kind of tired that was load-bearing, the weight of things she was managing alone. One Friday in mid-February, she arrived 8 minutes late, which for Victoria was essentially catastrophic, and sat down and said nothing for a full 30 seconds, and Logan watched her do the thing where she assembled herself visibly, like a structure being reinforced. "Bad morning?" he said. "Cohen is counterfiling." She looked up. "It's expected. It's tactical. It doesn't change the fundamental facts." A pause. "It's just one more thing." "It's a lot of one more things." "Yes." She looked at her water glass. "There are days when I'm very good at being the CEO of a company my father built and very bad at being a person." "You seem like a person to me." "I mean," she stopped, and the frustration in it was real and raw. "I had a call this morning from our head of communications asking me how I wanted to manage the press around the litigation, and I couldn't. I couldn't think about it. I just sat there and stared at my phone for about a minute and a half." "Which is not something I do. I don't stare at things." "You stared at the park fountain a lot." She looked at him, then, reluctantly, "That's different." "You were thinking." "I was—" She stopped again. Exhaled. "I'm exhausted, Logan. I've been exhausted for 14 months, and I don't know when it stops." He didn't say anything immediately. He let it sit for a moment, the way she did when he said something that needed sitting. "You've been doing this alone for a long time," he said. "I'm good at alone." "That's not what I said." She looked at him. "Being good at something doesn't mean it's not costing you," he said. "Those are two different things." She was quiet. Outside, Caldwell Street moved through its ordinary Friday. A delivery truck double-parked, someone arguing over the price of something at a fruit stand. The ordinary city noise that had no awareness of being background to anything. "My attorney says the counterfiling is mostly noise," Victoria said finally. "She thinks it's a delay tactic. Do you trust her?" "Completely." "Then trust her." "I do. I just—" She picked up her coffee, put it down. "I don't like noise. I like clarity. Nobody likes noise, but sometimes noise is all you get until the thing resolves." She looked at him the way she occasionally did, like she was cataloging something. "You're very calm about things," she said. "Not in a passive way, in a— You seem to have made some actual peace with the fact that things are messy." "I had a messy few years," he said. "You learn or you don't." "What did you learn?" He thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. That most things aren't emergencies even when they feel like it. And the things that are actual emergencies, you deal with them when they happen, and not a minute before. A pause. Emma helped with that. Hard to maintain a catastrophic inner monologue when someone's asking you to explain what photosynthesis is for the third time while you're trying to have a crisis. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed. The real one. The unguarded one, and pressed her hand briefly against her mouth as if surprised by it. "That's—" She shook her head. "That's actually a useful thought. Hold on to it. I don't have many." "You have more than you think." He looked at her. "You have more than you give yourself credit for," she said, more carefully now. "You know that, right?" He didn't have an answer for that, not an immediate one. It landed in a place he hadn't expected it to land, which was a specific experience, being seen by someone who was very good at seeing and not being sure what to do with it. "The soup's getting cold," he said. She didn't call him out on the deflection. She just picked up her spoon, and they ate, and the conversation found its way to easier ground. Emma's current obsession with origami, Victoria's genuine bafflement at how origami worked structurally, a digression about paper folding that somehow lasted 15 minutes and ended with her pulling a napkin toward her and trying, seriously, to replicate a crane from Logan's description while the server pretended not to watch. She failed at the crane. She was irritated about it in a way that was completely unguarded and very funny, and Logan thought that was the most relaxed he'd ever seen her. He told Dwight about the lunches in March because Dwight was going to find out anyway, and it was better to manage the information than be ambushed by it. Dwight listened, nodded slowly, and said, "So the woman from the park?" "Yeah." "The CEO of Hartwell Corporation?" "Yeah." A long pause. "Logan?" I know. She runs a company worth. I know, Dwight. And you're taking her to lunch. She's taking herself. We both pay for our own food. A pause. Usually, sometimes she pays before I can stop her. Dwight stared at him for an extended moment. And what are we calling this? Two people who know each other having lunch. That is a very careful description. It's an accurate one. It is. Dwight laced his fingers together. It's also the description of something that becomes something else, and you just haven't used that word yet. Logan was quiet. Is she good to you? Dwight asked. The directness of it, under the ribbing, was genuine. Yeah, Logan said. She is. And Emma? Emma thinks she's one of the best people on Earth. Emma has thought this since approximately the first drawing she put in the bag. He looked at his desk. She asked me last week if Victoria was going to be around more. Just asked it straight out. You know how she is. What did you say? I said I thought she might be. He paused. And Emma said good, because she had about 40 more origami cranes to teach someone. Dwight was quiet for a moment, and when he looked at Logan, his expression had lost the teasing quality it usually held when this subject came up. You deserve good things, Dwight said. I just want you to be clear-eyed about what you're walking into. Different worlds, Logan said. Very different worlds. I know. He met Dwight's eyes. I know what it is. I'm not confused about it. But he also knew what it felt like to sit across from her at a narrow table in a lunch place on Caldwell and Fifth and watch her fail at origami with her jaw set and her eyes focused, completely in the moment, all the weight of the company and the litigation and the exhaustion temporarily set aside, and feel, in a way he hadn't felt in a long time, like the room was better for having her in it. That was real. Whatever else was or wasn't, that was real. He left it there for now. Let it exist without naming it, the way you let a fire warm a room before you decide whether to build it bigger. March moved forward. The days started coming in a little lighter, the city exhaling slightly from winter, the park losing its frozen quality in the mornings. Logan still went through Alderman Square most days, though there was no one on the bench now. Once on a Tuesday, he stopped at the far bench and stood there for a moment with his coffee, looking at the fountain, which had started running again for the first time since November. Emma, beside him, said, Do you miss her being here? He looked at the bench. This was better for her, he said. I know, Emma said, but do you miss it? He looked at the fountain running clear and cold in the March morning. Yeah, he said, a little. Emma took his hand. That's okay too, she said, missing things you don't want back. He looked down at her. 7 years old, in a purple coat, slightly too big boots because she was in a growth phase, and he'd bought a size up, her hair in the uneven pigtails she'd insisted on doing herself that morning. How are you this smart? He said. I get it from you, she said serenely, and started walking. He followed her, and the fountain ran on behind them, and the day opened up. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in late March, and it changed the shape of everything that came after. Logan was in the middle of a vendor dispute. A supplier out of Cincinnati claiming a shipment had been marked received when it hadn't, which was either a paperwork error or something worse, and either way required his full attention, when his phone buzzed on the desk beside him. Victoria. He held up one finger to the man across from him and stepped into the hallway. Hey, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back in 20? I need to ask you something. Her voice had that quality it got when she was being careful, measured, the emotional temperature deliberately controlled. It's professional. I want to be clear about that up front. He leaned against the hallway wall. Okay. Hartwell's operations division has been running on an interim director since November. The man Cohen installed in that position was removed when we cleaned house in January, and I've been covering it with 2 senior managers who are stretched past their capacity. A pause. I've been looking at candidates for 3 months. External candidates, people with the right credentials and the right background on paper. Another pause. And I keep coming back to a conversation we had in February about your inventory management system. Logan was quiet. You identified 4 structural inefficiencies in a company you don't work for in a casual conversation over soup, Victoria said. You did it without trying to. You did it the way you talk about everything, just laying out what you see. Her voice was careful but direct. I want you to interview for the position. He let out a slow breath. Victoria, I know what you're going to say. I don't think you do. You're going to say it's because of the park, because of the mornings, that I'm conflating personal history with professional judgment. That's part of it. It would be for anyone reasonable. And you're reasonable. She paused. But I've spent 12 years making hiring decisions, and I know the difference between gratitude and assessment. I'm not offering you a job because you brought me breakfast. I'm asking you to come in because every time we've talked about operations, supply chain, or people management, you've said things that demonstrate a quality of thinking my current candidates don't have. He didn't say anything immediately. Down the hallway, the vendor dispute was still waiting, visible through the glass partition of the conference room. A man checking his phone, the mild irritation of someone who'd been left mid-conversation. What's the position? Logan said. Director of Operations. You'd oversee distribution logistics, vendor relationships, and the internal supply chain for 3 of our manufacturing divisions. A beat. It's a significant step up from what you're doing. That's an understatement. Yes, it is. And you think I can do it? I think you can do it. No hedging, no qualification. I wouldn't ask if I didn't. He looked at the ceiling, an ordinary drop ceiling, the kind he'd looked at every day for 4 years without ever particularly seeing it. I need to think about it. Of course. And I need to ask you something first. Ask. He chose his words carefully because this was the part that mattered most. If I interview and it doesn't go well, or if you decide after a proper process that I'm not the right fit, does that change anything between us? A pause. No? You're sure? Logan, I sat on a park bench for 4 months. I know who I am and I know what I mean when I say something. A shorter pause, and underneath the professional steadiness, something more human. You are not a risk to me. You're the opposite of that. He let out a breath. Okay, he said. I'll come in. The Hartwell building was on Commerce Avenue, 32 floors of glass and steel that announced itself without apology. Logan had walked past it maybe 100 times in his life without ever looking up for very long. He looked up now, on a Thursday morning in early April, standing on the sidewalk in the suit he'd worn to his brother's wedding 3 years ago and had dry cleaned twice since without occasion to use. It still fit, barely. He'd put on muscle in his shoulders somewhere in the intervening years. He went in. Victoria had set up the interview as a proper process, which he'd expected and which he respected. He met with her head of HR first, a precise woman named Dana Cho, who asked him questions from a structured list and took notes with the focused efficiency of someone who'd seen 1,000 of these. He met with the 2 senior managers who'd been covering the interim gap, Marcus Webb and Priya Okafor, both of whom were clearly smart, clearly overextended, and both of whom looked at him with an appraisal that was honest and not unfriendly. He met with the CFO, a man named Garrett, whose handshake was aggressive in a way that was probably unconscious, and whose questions were designed to find the edges of what Logan knew. Logan answered everything directly. He didn't oversell and he didn't undersell. He said, I don't know that specific system, but I can learn it when he didn't know something. And he said, here's what I'd do when he did. He talked about the Cincinnati vendor dispute, the actual mechanics of how he'd resolved it, what it revealed about documentation gaps in his current company's process, what he'd changed afterward. Garrett stopped tapping his pen partway through that answer and started actually listening. He saw Victoria once during the day, briefly, in the hallway between the HR meeting and the meeting with Marcus and Priya. She was with 2 people he didn't recognize, mid-conversation, moving with the focused velocity of someone whose hours were spoken for 3 weeks in advance. She caught his eye in passing. Her expression gave nothing away professionally, but she gave him the smallest nod, barely a movement, just an acknowledgement, and kept walking. He exhaled and went into the next meeting. She called that evening. How do you think it went? She asked. Garrett tried to rattle me in the 3rd question, and I let him, and then answered it anyway. I know. He told me. A pause. He said he'd hire you. That's not a thing Garrett says about external candidates. What does Dana say? Dana says your experience profile is non-standard for a director-level position. which is accurate and not disqualifying. Another pause. She also said you were the only candidate in 3 months who answered the question about team conflict resolution with a real example instead of a framework. It was a real question. I gave it a real answer. I know. He could hear something in her voice that was working to stay professional and mostly managing it. I want to offer you the position. Logan sat down on the edge of his bed. In the next room, Emma was doing her bath routine. He could hear the intermittent splashing and the running commentary she provided to herself when she thought no one was listening. I need the weekend, he said. You have it. And I want to talk to Emma. Of course. She's part of this decision. It affects her schedule, her routines. She doesn't get a vote exactly, but she gets a voice, a beat. You're a good father. I'm trying to be. He looked at the wall. I'll call you Monday. Monday, she agreed. And then quieter. Logan, whatever you decide, I mean that. Whatever you decide is the right call. I know. Do you? He thought about the hallway nod. The measured quality of her voice right now that was the Victoria he knew. The one who said precisely what she meant, and nothing extra. Yeah, he said. I do. He talked to Emma on Saturday morning, at the kitchen table, over the pancakes that were the weekly constant of their domestic life. He didn't dress it up. He laid it out the way he'd lay anything out to her. You're old enough to understand this, so here it is. A different job. A bigger job. More complicated. Better for them financially. New schedule, maybe new school in a couple of years if things worked out. Emma ate a bite of pancake. Victoria's company? Yeah. Victoria asked you to? She did. Emma ate another bite, and Logan watched her think. The specific expression she had when she was working something through, which looked exactly like a smaller version of the expression he apparently had when he was working something through, which Angela had pointed out once and which he'd never quite gotten past. Are you scared? Emma asked. A little. Of the job or of Victoria? He looked at his daughter. Both, maybe. Emma considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I think you should do it, she said. Yeah? Victoria is good. She kept my drawing. She stabbed a piece of pancake. And you're good at figuring out when things aren't working and fixing them. That's basically what the job is, right? More or less. Then you should do it. She looked up at him. And if you mess up at first, you'll figure it out. You always do. He looked at her across the table, at the syrup on her chin and the certainty in her eyes, and he thought that whatever mistakes he'd made and whatever he hadn't figured out, he'd gotten this completely right. This specific person, sitting here, believing in him with a simplicity that made everything complicated feel less so. Okay, he said. Emma went back to her pancakes. Can I come see the office sometime? We'll see. That means yes eventually. It means we'll see. Dad, I'm 7, not a baby. She picked up her fork. It means yes eventually. He called Victoria on Monday morning. His last day at Harwick was a Friday in late April. Dwight organized something that was officially described as a departmental meeting and turned out to be a cake situation in the break room with an inexplicable banner that said, Good luck, Logan, in what appeared to be hand-painted letters, listing slightly to the left. Half the warehouse floor came through. People he'd worked alongside for 4 years who expressed their feelings about his departure in the way people in warehouses express feelings. Indirectly, gruffly, in the form of bad jokes and genuine handshakes. Dwight hugged him. Dwight was not a hugger. The fact of it landed. You call me if it goes sideways, Dwight said. It won't go sideways. It might. New territory, Logan. Don't be too proud to call. I'll call. And bring Emma by sometime. Sandra's been asking about her. He drove home with the cake box on the passenger seat, the banner folded in the back, and a specific feeling in his chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite excitement, the feeling of a door closing on something that had been real and good, and that you were walking away from anyway, because the thing ahead was realer. His first week at Hartwell was one of the hardest things he'd done in years. Not because anyone was unkind, They weren't, but because the gap between what he knew and what was expected was visible and immediate, and he couldn't pretend it wasn't. The systems were different. The scale was different. A decision that would have been his alone at Harwick was here a decision that involved 3 departments, legal review, and a communication chain that he spent his first 3 days trying to map. He stayed late every night that week. He came in early every morning. He filled 2 notebooks, taking the kind of notes he hadn't taken since he was 20. He made 2 mistakes in the first week. One was a vendor communication he handled through the wrong channel, which created a duplication of process that Marcus Webb had to spend 2 hours cleaning up. Marcus was decent about it, corrected it, explained the system, didn't make it a thing. The second mistake was a forecast projection he'd built on assumptions that were accurate for a mid-sized distribution company and were wrong for an operation at Hartwell's scale. The CFO Garrett pointed it out in a meeting with 6 people present, precisely and without cruelty. Logan sat with it, corrected it, and rebuilt the projection overnight. He did not go to Victoria with either mistake. This was a decision he'd made before he started, that whatever they were to each other, outside this building, inside it, he was going to stand on his own. He was not going to use the personal connection as a buffer. He was not going to trade on it. He'd earned this position through a legitimate process, and he was going to prove it through legitimate work, and if he failed, he was going to fail visibly and own it. Victoria, for her part, seemed to understand this without being told. She ran the company. He was one of many people in it. They passed in hallways, attended some of the same meetings, corresponded by email with the same professional register he used with anyone else. In the 3 weeks he'd been there, she hadn't treated him differently than she treated her other directors, which meant with clarity, high expectations, and the specific quality of attention she brought to things she took seriously. He found he respected it, and found, in some complicated way, that it made the other thing more real rather than less. That she was capable of holding both things at once, the professional and the personal, without letting one contaminate the other. What was the other thing? That was the question he was sitting with, driving home on a Friday evening in May, with the city doing its end-of-week exhale around him. He knew what it was. He'd known for a while. He'd been letting it exist without naming it, because naming it meant making decisions about it. And making decisions about it meant having a conversation he wasn't certain how to start, or how it would land. She was his employer. Technically, directly, she was the person who had offered him this position. That was real, and it mattered, and he wasn't going to pretend it didn't complicate things. But she was also the woman who'd told him that the fact he hadn't asked mattered to her, who'd said he was more perceptive than he looked, who'd laughed at herself over a napkin crane and pressed her hand between Emma's shoulder blades in a frozen park with the careful tenderness of someone who wasn't sure she was allowed, but did it anyway. Those were also real things. They didn't cancel each other out. The complication arrived in the second week of May in the form of a profile piece. A business publication called Capital Review ran a story on Hartwell's recovery from the boardroom crisis. The narrative of how Victoria had outmaneuvered Coan and reclaimed the company, told in the congratulatory tones that business journalism used for people who won publicly. It was a good piece, well-sourced, accurate as far as Logan could tell. He read it on his lunch break without particular feeling about it. The problem was the sidebar. It was a short piece, supplementary to the main article. The kindness that started it all. It ran with a photo of Alderman Square and Logan's name in the 4th paragraph. A distribution supervisor named Logan Carter, who reportedly brought the executive daily meals during her months in hiding. And then, in the 5th paragraph, Carter was recently hired as Hartwell's Director of Operations, a senior position he had no previous experience qualifying him for. He read the 5th paragraph twice. He set his phone face down on the desk. He sat with the very specific, very unpleasant sensation of watching a narrative form around him that was not the whole story, but was not entirely wrong either, and knowing that whether it was fair or not, it was now in the world. He didn't call Victoria. He waited, because he knew her, and knew she'd have seen it before he had, and knew she'd handle it in her own order. She appeared in his office doorway at 3:15. She closed the door behind her, which she never did. She sat down across from his desk, the same way she sat in the lunch place, straight-backed and deliberate. And she looked at him. "I've seen it," he said. "I know." Her expression was controlled but not cold. It was the face she wore when something had cost her and she was working to make the cost not show. I want to be clear with you about something. Okay? The hire was legitimate. Dana and Garrett both advocated for you independently. The process was clean and documented. She held his gaze. I need you to know that I know that. Whatever anyone says or writes. I know it, he said. I was there. Some people here won't see it that way. She said it plainly, not softening it. There are people in this building who are going to look at that piece and draw the easiest conclusion. I can't control that. I know. It will make your position harder, not impossible, but harder. She paused. I'm sorry. The piece wasn't authorized. The journalist got the Alderman Square detail from somewhere I haven't identified yet. It doesn't matter where they got it. It matters to me. Her voice was even, but there was something sharp running under it, the anger she kept harnessed. You earned this. The insinuation that you didn't… Victoria. He said it quietly, and she stopped. People are going to think what they think. I can't change that. What I can do is the job well enough that after 6 months there's not a reasonable argument left. He looked at her. That's what I was going to do anyway. She held his gaze. You're not upset, she said. I'm not thrilled about it, but upset doesn't help anything. He paused. Are you okay? The question surprised her. He watched it land. People did not often ask Victoria Hart that question in a professional context, and it briefly showed. I'm managing, she said. That's what you said in October when I asked if you were okay. A short pause. I suppose it is. Does it mean the same thing now? She was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet that was genuine consideration, not deflection. No, she said. Not entirely. He nodded. She stood, smoothed her jacket. The professional composure reassembled itself, clean and practiced. I'll have a communications response ready by end of day. Dana is briefing the senior staff. Okay. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. She had her back to him, and for a second the composed exterior wasn't quite all he could see. There was something else in the set of her shoulders, something that was tired in the same old way, and also something else, something newer. Logan, she said without turning. Yeah. I'm sorry this is harder because of me. It's not harder because of you. He meant it. It's more complicated. Those are different things. She turned then, just slightly, enough that he could see the edge of her profile. She nodded once, not the professional nod, the other one, the one that meant something was received and held. Then she left. He looked at the closed door for a moment, then turned back to his desk, where the rebuilt projection was waiting to be finalized, and a vendor call was scheduled in 40 minutes, and the ordinary, demanding work of proving himself was exactly where he'd left it. He picked up his pen and started where he'd left off. Emma found out about the article from a girl in her class whose mother worked in finance and had apparently discussed the story at dinner within earshot. She came home on a Tuesday and said, "A girl at school said you got your job because of Victoria." Logan was making dinner. He turned down the burner. "What did you say?" "I said that was wrong. I said you got your job because you're good at it, and Victoria knows that because she's smart." Emma put her backpack on its hook with more force than necessary. And then she said her mom said, "Actually, I don't want to say what she said." "You can say it." Emma looked at him. "She said her mom said maybe Victoria likes you, and that's why you got the job." He turned back to the stove, gave himself 3 seconds, turned around. "What do you think?" he asked. Emma crossed her arms. "I think people say stuff when they don't know the whole story. And the whole story is that you helped Victoria when she needed help and didn't ask for anything, and that's why she trusts you." She paused. "And maybe she does like you, but that's different from the job thing." He looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said. "You're right, on all of it." Emma uncrossed her arms. "Is Victoria okay? About the thing people are saying?" "She's handling it." "You should check on her." "Emma, Dad." She fixed him with the look she'd developed recently, the one that was entirely too knowing for 7 years old. "You check on everyone else. Who checks on you? Victoria does." She picked up her backpack again. "So you should check on her. It's only fair. He watched her disappear into her room, and he stood in the kitchen with the burner going low under a pot of water and the specific feeling of being out-argued by someone who learned her words from him. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. He typed, "Send us tomorrow if you're free." Her reply came 4 minutes later, 12:30. He set the phone down and went back to dinner, and outside the window the city moved through its Tuesday evening, ordinary and unhurried, carrying everything forward the way cities do, without asking, without waiting, just carrying it forward. They had the soup. They always had the soup. Senna's on a Wednesday was quieter than Fridays. Fewer suits, more of the neighborhood regulars, a different pace to the room that Logan had come to associate with conversations that ran longer than 45 minutes, because neither of them was checking the time. He'd gotten there first, as always. She'd arrived at 12:32, which meant she'd been standing outside for a minute, which he'd stopped pretending he didn't notice. She sat down and looked at him and said, "I had Garrett pull your performance metrics this morning." "Good morning to you, too." "Good morning." A pause. "Your vendor renegotiation with the Cincinnati supplier saved the company $230,000 in the first quarter." "I know what it saved." I wanted to say it out loud. She picked up her menu, which she never actually needed. Dana's office has received 3 emails from Capital Review since the profile piece ran. 2 of them are asking for follow-up comment. One of them is asking if you'd be willing to do an interview. No. That was my answer also. She set the menu down. I wanted you to know it was being managed. I know you're managing it. He looked at her. That's not why I texted you. She looked back at him. Emma told me to check on you, he said. So I'm checking. Something moved across her expression. Not quite amusement, not quite something softer, somewhere between the two. She's 7, Victoria said. She's 7 and she's right. He leaned forward slightly. The article, the board cleanup, the last 6 months. You've been running at a pace that's not sustainable, and I know you know that, and I know you're not going to slow down. But I'm asking anyway. How are you actually doing? She was quiet in the way that meant she was deciding how honest to be, running the internal calculation that he'd watched her run 100 times. I had a panic attack in the parking garage 2 weeks ago, she said. He didn't react. He kept his face neutral and steady because he understood instinctively that she needed to say it into a space that didn't collapse around her. In my car, she continued, before I drove home. I sat there for 20 minutes. Her voice was even, but the evenness was doing work. I haven't had one since I was 23, after my mother left. A pause. I didn't tell anyone. You're telling me? Yes. She looked at the table. I'm telling you. Are you seeing anyone? A therapist? A doctor? I have an appointment next week. I made it the day after. She glanced up. I'm not someone who ignores things. I just also don't announce them. I know. He paused. I'm glad you told me. She looked at him steadily. I almost didn't. I know that too. The server came and they ordered, and the brief interruption did the thing. Interruptions sometimes did, released a pressure valve just enough to let them both breathe. When the server left, Victoria wrapped her hands around her water glass and looked toward the front window at the ordinary Wednesday street. My father used to say that the most dangerous thing a person in a leadership position could do was confuse endurance with strength, she said. He said real strength knew when to put the weight down for a minute. A pause. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. He sounds like he was a good man. He was difficult and demanding, and he pushed me harder than was sometimes fair. She paused again. And yes, he was a good man. She looked at Logan. You would have argued with each other constantly. You would have respected each other completely. Logan filed that away without examining it too closely in front of her. The board cleanup is mostly done, she said, shifting back to the practical, which was her move when she'd said something that felt too open. Cohn's legal team filed a final motion last week that my attorney describes as a Hail Mary. The 2 board members who aligned with him have both resigned. We've seated 2 new independent directors who I've vetted personally. She exhaled. It's not over. Litigation like this doesn't end cleanly, but the company is stable. Good. The operations metrics for Q1 were the best we've had since my father was running the floor directly. She looked at him. That's yours. That's the team's. The team needed direction. You gave it to them. She said it plainly, not to flatter him. Marcus told me last week that the restructured vendor review process you built is the clearest framework he's worked with in his career. Marcus has been here 11 years. Logan shifted slightly. He was still not comfortable receiving this from her across a lunch table, still felt the snagging awareness of the power differential, the professional distance he was careful to maintain. Victoria, I'm not your boss right now, she said. We're at Senna's. I'm allowed to say accurate things. He looked at her. You're allowed to hear them, she added. He was quiet for a moment. It's still hard to separate. I know. She turned her water glass in her hands. I've been thinking about that. He waited. What we are, she said carefully. Inside the building and outside of it. I'm aware that it's complicated. I'm aware that I put you in a position that makes it complicated by hiring you, and I want to say directly that I've thought about whether that was the right decision, and I believe it was, professionally, but I also know that it created a layer of difficulty that's mine to own. You didn't create the difficulty alone. I said yes. You said yes because you trusted my judgment and your own capabilities, not because of... She stopped. Not for personal reasons. No, he said. Not for personal reasons. They looked at each other across the table, and the thing that had been sitting between them for months, not unacknowledged, not ignored, just carefully left in its place, was present in the air the way things are present when two careful people have stopped pretending. I don't know how to do this, Victoria said. This specific thing. I've run a corporation. I've handled a boardroom coup. I know how to read a room of hostile investors and come out intact. A pause. I don't have a framework for this. Neither do I. You seem calmer about that than I am. I've had more practice not having frameworks. He met her eyes. I just show up and see what happens. She held his gaze. That sounds terrifying. It is sometimes. A beat. But it's also how the paper bag started, and that worked out okay. Something in her expression shifted, broke slightly, in the good way, the way things break when the tension has been held too long. Not a smile exactly, but close, closer than usual. Logan, she said, yeah. I want to spend time with you, outside of lunches and outside of the building. She said it the way she said everything she meant, directly, no approach shot, just the thing itself. I want to take Emma to the park on a Saturday and not have it be strategic. I want to sit somewhere without a clock on it. A pause. I want to see if this is what I think it is. What do you think it is? She looked at him for a long moment. Something I haven't had before, she said. Something I don't want to lose by mishandling it. The soup arrived. They let the moment settle into the space between them, and Logan picked up his spoon and said, Saturday. She looked up. Alderman Square, he said. 9 o'clock. Emma will want to show you the fountain. She has a whole thing about the fountain. Victoria picked up her spoon. The corner of her mouth moved. Does she know about the origami crane failure? She knows. She's prepared a remedial lesson. She paused. That's actually fine. I've been thinking about where I went wrong with the paper. He laughed, fully, without checking it. And she looked briefly startled, the way she did when his laugh caught her off guard. And then she shook her head and looked at her soup with the expression of someone allowing themselves something they'd been holding at a distance. They ate. The room moved around them. The clock did not particularly matter. Saturday was cool and clear, the kind of May morning that arrived like an apology for everything February had done. Logan and Emma got to Alderman Square at 9:10 because Emma had changed her shoes twice and then couldn't find the origami paper she'd specifically set out the night before. And Logan had found it under her bed along with 3 library books that were due last month and a small ceramic frog he'd thought was lost. Victoria was on the bench. Not the far bench. She wasn't doing that, wasn't staging something. She was on the near bench, the one closer to the entrance, with a coffee in each hand and a third cup and a carry holder beside her. And she was watching the fountain the same way she had on all those autumn mornings, except that she looked different now. Not the guarded stillness of someone waiting out a hard period, but something closer to present, like she was actually just sitting in a park on a Saturday morning, which was a thing a person could do. Emma saw her before Logan finished his sentence about the library books and started running. "Victoria!" Victoria stood, half stood, the automatic reflex of someone prepared to receive a 7-year-old at velocity, and Emma crashed into her with the specific lack of braking ability that characterized her approach to people she was happy to see. Victoria caught her, one arm around Emma's shoulders, and the look on her face was the same as the park in January. Briefly unguarded, briefly overwhelmed, something tender surfacing before the composure could get there first. "Hi," Victoria said into Emma's hair. "I brought the origami paper," Emma announced, pulling back and holding up a small stack of colored squares. "I'm going to teach you properly this time. You were doing the first fold wrong." "I was following your father's instructions." Dad's instructions were verbal. Verbal instructions don't work for origami. You need to see it. Emma looked at her with the authority of someone who had practiced this argument. "I looked it up." "She did," Logan confirmed, arriving with the coffee carrier. Tuesday evening, 45 minutes of YouTube. Victoria looked at him over Emma's head. There was something in her expression that was warm and dry and slightly helpless, which was a combination he'd come to understand was what genuine feeling looked like on her face when she wasn't managing it. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. "I didn't know how Emma took hers." "Hot chocolate. I smuggled one in the side pocket." He sat down on the bench beside her, Emma already arranging herself cross-legged on the ground in front of them with her origami squares in a neat row. "You've been here a while." 20 minutes. Early." "I'm always early." She looked at him with a slight lift of her chin. "It's considerate." He recognized his own line. "Touché." They sat side by side on the bench while Emma laid out her materials and began her tutorial in the precise, patient tone she used when she was taking something seriously, which was the same tone Logan used when he was explaining something at work. And he noticed Victoria noticed this, watched her register the resemblance and look at Emma with an expression he couldn't fully read, but that seemed close to moved. The origami lesson was earnest and moderately successful. Emma walked Victoria through a basic crane fold 3 times, correcting each error with the measured tolerance of a good teacher. "Not that far, just a little, see?" And Logan watched Victoria follow instructions with her full attention, which was not the polite attention of someone humoring a child, but the actual focused engagement of someone trying to get the fold right, because getting things right mattered to her. She got it right on the 3rd try. The crane was imperfect, one wing slightly lower than the other, the neck not quite aligned, but it was identifiably a crane. Emma examined it. "That's good," she said. "It's crooked." "All the best ones are a little crooked." Emma held it up against the light. "I'm going to keep it." Victoria looked at the small, imperfect paper crane in Emma's hand, and for a moment she didn't say anything, and Logan, who was watching her profile, saw the thing happen that he'd seen in January, the brief opening of something behind her eyes that she usually kept sealed. "Okay," Victoria said quietly. Emma pocketed the crane and moved on to a second lesson, a simpler flower fold, and the morning opened up around them, the park filling slowly with the Saturday population. Dog walkers, joggers, a couple with a stroller, a very old man who sat on the far bench with a thermos and appeared to be composing music in a small notebook. The fountain ran. The elm trees were fully leafed now, green against the clear May sky. Logan sat with his coffee and the specific grounded feeling of being in the right place at the right time, which was not a feeling he had often and which he had learned not to take for granted. "She's going to be something," Victoria said quietly, beside him. Emma was now trying to teach herself a 3rd fold from memory, brow furrowed, paper turning in her hands. "She already is something. I mean," Victoria paused. "She's going to be formidable. She's already formidable. She just doesn't know the word for it yet." He looked at his daughter. "She knows the feeling of it." "Yes." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "That's actually better." They stayed in the park until almost 11, which was longer than Logan had expected and exactly as long as it needed to be. On the walk out, Emma took Victoria's hand with the same uncalculated ease with which she took Logan's, and Victoria looked down at their joined hands with an expression that she recovered from quickly, but not quickly enough. At the park entrance, Emma said she was hungry and that she wanted waffles, and this was how the three of them ended up at a diner on Harwick Street that Logan had been going to since Emma was 3, sitting in a corner booth with sticky laminated menus and a server named Pete who called Emma the usual suspect and brought her a hot chocolate without being asked. Victoria sat across from them, and she looked at the menu with the same serious attention she brought to everything, and she ordered the waffles because Emma told her to, and the conversation moved through Emma's origami ambitions and Victoria's opinion of waffles, favorable, which Emma greeted with visible relief. And Logan's plan to repaint Emma's room over the summer. Emma wanted orange. Logan was negotiating toward a slightly less aggressive shade. "What color would you pick?" Emma asked Victoria. Victoria considered the question seriously. "Something that would look good in different light. Rooms change with the time of day. You want a color that works in the morning and at night." Emma squinted at this. "So what color?" "A deep yellow, almost amber. It's warm without being aggressive." Emma looked at Logan. "Can we do that one?" "We can look at swatches." "That means yes, eventually," Emma told Victoria. Victoria looked at Logan. He shrugged. She turned back to Emma with the closest thing to an unguarded smile he'd seen on her face in 6 months. Not the controlled movement, not the actual thing, brief and genuine and a little surprised by itself. It was, Logan thought, a very good smile. June came in fast and warm, and Logan's 3rd month at Hartwell was the month things stopped being hard in the way they'd been hard, and started being hard in the way good work was hard. Challenging rather than treacherous, demanding rather than defeating. He knew the systems now. He knew his people. Marcus Webb had stopped second-guessing the process changes and started contributing to them, which was the signal Logan had been waiting for. Priya Okafor had told him in a one-on-one that the vendor framework he'd built was cleaner than anything the division had operated under in her 8 years with the company, which she said without warmth, but which he understood was, from Priya, a significant statement. He was doing the job. Not perfectly. There were still miscalculations. Still moments where his instincts from a smaller operation led him wrong, and he had to correct course. But he was doing the job, and the work itself was showing it. The Capitol Review story had faded, the way these things faded, displaced by newer narratives. There had been a brief round of internal noise, whispers that he'd gotten the position through personal connection, the specific cruelty of that kind of insinuation, and he had done exactly what he'd told Victoria he would do. He'd let the work speak. He'd been professional and consistent and done nothing to either confirm or feed the story, and by the end of May, it had the energy of something people were bored of repeating. 2 people had come to him directly. One was a manager from the finance team who'd asked, in the precise euphemistic language of corporate environments, whether Logan's relationship with Victoria was going to be a factor in certain budget discussions. Logan had looked at him levelly and said, "Bring the budget proposal through the standard channel and it'll be evaluated on its merits. Same as everything else." The man had nodded and left, and the budget proposal had come through the standard channel and had been evaluated on its merits. That was the end of that. The second was Garrett. Garrett found him in the hallway near the elevators on a Thursday afternoon in late June and said, without preamble, "The Q2 projections you submitted are the most accurate forecast this division has produced in 3 years." Logan looked at him. "Thank you." "I was wrong about you," Garrett said. "Initially." He said it the way men like Garrett said things like that, directly, without elaboration, offering the acknowledgement and moving on before it could become a moment. "I know," Logan said. "It was a reasonable initial read." Garrett nodded once, got in the elevator. Logan watched the doors close and stood in the hallway for a moment with the quiet satisfaction of a thing having been earned. He texted Victoria that evening. Not about the job, not about Garrett. Just, "Emma learned a new fold. Some kind of dragon. It took 40 minutes, and I can confirm it does not look like a dragon." Her reply came 6 minutes later. "Describe it. Imagine a dragon. Now imagine the dragon had a bad day." A pause. Then, "I want to see it. Come for dinner Saturday. Emma will present it formally." Another pause. Longer. "I'll bring wine." "What does Emma want?" "She'll say sparkling water because she thinks it's sophisticated." It is sophisticated. 7-year-olds with opinions about sparkling water are a net positive. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his phone, and the warmth in his chest was the specific warmth of something becoming real. Not a hope or a projection, but an actual thing, assembling itself in the ordinary details of a Thursday evening text exchange. He typed, "Saturday at 6. Her reply, "I'll be there at 6. He put the phone down and thought about that. About the fact that she would be there at 6, not 6:02, not 6:10, but 6. That she would be standing in his doorway with wine and the particular focused attention she brought to things she'd decided to show up for. He thought about the bench. The September morning, 4 cups of coffee ago, when he'd set down a paper bag without knowing her name and without expecting anything back. He thought about all the mornings between that one and this, all the cold air and the paper bags and Emma's drawings and the knock-knock joke she didn't understand and Christmas morning in a frozen park and the curve of Victoria's profile when she almost smiled. He thought about what Emma had said in February. Maybe she likes you. With the calm accuracy of a child who hadn't yet learned to complicate obvious things. He looked at the ceiling of the apartment on Crescent Avenue, which he'd been looking at for 4 years, and he thought, things change. Not neatly, not without cost, not without the work of getting through the hard parts. But they change. He thought about his father in Columbus, and the 12-year-old Honda, and the 2 notebooks he'd filled at a new desk in a building he'd once walked past without looking up. He thought about Victoria's face over a folded paper crane, briefly open, briefly overwhelmed, catching herself a moment too late. He got up and went to check on Emma, who was asleep with the dragon that wasn't a dragon on her nightstand beside her water glass and 3 library books she had not yet returned. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went to bed, and outside the window Millhaven moved through its Thursday night, the sound of it steady and continuous, the city's long, unhurried breath. And Saturday was 2 days away. She arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. Logan heard the knock and checked the time without meaning to. An instinct, not a test. And it was 6 on the dot, and he stood in the kitchen for a half-second with a dish towel in his hand before Emma's footsteps crossed the living room at a sprint, and he heard the door open and Emma say, "You came in the tone of someone greeting a fact they'd believed in, but are still relieved to confirm." "I said I would." Victoria's voice. "Dad says that too, and sometimes he's late." "Emma?" Logan appeared in the hallway. "It's accurate," Emma said serenely, and stepped aside to let Victoria in. She looked different in this context. Not the structured jacket, not the professional armor, dark jeans, a simple gray top, her hair down. She was carrying a bottle of wine and a small glass bottle of sparkling water with a ribbon around the neck, which she held out to Emma with the gravity of someone presenting something officially. Emma took it and examined the ribbon. "This is very fancy." Sophisticated choices deserve proper presentation. Emma looked at Logan. He raised his eyebrows. She turned back to Victoria with renewed respect. "You can come in." "Thank you," Victoria said. She looked at Logan over Emma's head as she came through the door, and there was a brief moment, 2 seconds, no more, where they were just looking at each other in the ordinary light of his apartment hallway. And in that moment, the whole distance between September and now was present and not heavy, just real. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. Emma was already in the kitchen examining the sparkling water label. Logan took the wine. The apartment smelled like the pasta he'd been making for the last 40 minutes, and he watched Victoria's face register the smell and the space, the small living room, the crayon drawings on the fridge visible from the hallway, Emma's shoes abandoned by the door at the angle of someone who'd kicked them off mid-stride, the unremarkable and genuine texture of a life actually lived in. She didn't look at it the way he'd half-worried she might, with the careful neutrality of someone from a different world tolerating a visit to another one. She looked at it the way she looked at the park in the mornings, like she was paying attention to something that mattered. "It smells good," she said. "It might be slightly overcooked." I was managing Emma's origami crisis at the same time. "It wasn't a crisis," Emma called from the kitchen. "It was a creative setback." Victoria looked at Logan. "She's been workshopping that phrase all week," he said. Now, dinner was pasta and garlic bread and the sparkling water in Emma's best glass, which was a juice glass with a faded cartoon on it that she'd had since she was 4 and still used for special occasions. Victoria drank wine. Logan drank whatever was left in the pot he'd been cooking with, which was a reasonable Chianti and which Emma critiqued purely on the basis of its color. The dragon origami was presented formally, as promised. Emma set it on the table between the bread basket and the pasta bowl and explained each fold with the technical precision of someone who had spent 40 minutes getting it wrong and 20 more minutes understanding why. Victoria examined it with her full attention, turned it in her hands, asked 2 genuine questions about the construction, and delivered her verdict. The wings are structurally sound. The neck has ambition. Emma considered this. That's what Dad said about my bike riding. It's a compliment. I know. That's why I liked it. But Emma reached across for the bread basket. I'm making you a better one for your office to go next to my horse drawing. Victoria looked at the dragon in her hands. I'd like that. It was the way she said it that mattered. Not indulgently, not with the careful warmth of someone being polite to a child. Just directly, the way she said everything she meant. Logan watched Emma register the difference, saw his daughter look at Victoria with the slow, certain expression she wore when she'd decided something was settled. They stayed at the table long after the pasta was gone, Emma talking and Victoria listening with the quality of attention that was one of the things Logan had come to understand as simply who she was. She didn't perform interest. She either had it or she didn't, and with Emma, she had it completely. They talked about school and the ongoing Foursquare disputes, and the Fox librarian dream that Emma had apparently been having in installments, each one more narratively complex than the last. Victoria asked questions that were not condescending child questions, but actual questions, and Emma answered them with the expansive authority of someone being taken seriously. Logan cleared the plates and listened from the kitchen and thought, this is what it looks like. Not a calculation, not a management, just this, pasta and sparkling water, and a paper dragon on the table, and the ordinary sound of 2 people he loved talking to each other. He stopped at that word briefly, the way you stop when you've rounded a corner and found yourself somewhere you didn't plan to be. He stayed with it for a moment. Then he brought out the dessert, which was ice cream because Emma had negotiated it earlier in the week, and he'd agreed in exchange for her finding the 3 overdue library books. Emma fell asleep on the couch at 9:15 in the middle of what was supposed to be a short television break. Logan carried her to bed. She was getting heavy, had been for a year, but he still carried her when she fell asleep places, and tucked her in and saw the paper dragon from dinner already on the nightstand beside its predecessor, the one from the origami crisis. The shelf above her bed had 3 of Victoria's cranes on it, the ones Emma had kept from the Saturday park sessions over the past weeks. Logan hadn't arranged them there. Emma had done it herself. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the quiet, ordinary miracle of his sleeping daughter in her room and felt the specific weight of gratitude that had no good language, the kind that just sat in your chest and asked nothing of you except to notice it. He went back to the living room. Victoria was at the window looking out at Crescent Avenue below. She'd tucked her feet up under her on the end of the couch, an unconscious thing, the kind of thing people did when they felt comfortable somewhere, and Logan noticed it and let it be. He sat on the other end of the couch. She turned from the window. She's down? Victoria asked. Gone. She'll sleep 11 hours. He paused. She put your cranes on her shelf. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I saw them when she showed me her room last week. She didn't ask me, she just did it. He looked at her. That's how she is about things she's decided. She knows her own mind. She does. He paused. She gets it from her mother mostly. Angela was the same way, certain about things. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I was the one who needed more time. To decide things? To admit what I'd already decided. He looked at her. It's a habit. She held his gaze for a moment, steady the way she was steady. Logan? I know, he said. Do you? I've known for a while. He set the cup down. I've been careful about it. Because of the company. Because of the position. I didn't want you to ever have reason to wonder whether it was... I don't wonder, she said. I never wondered. I know you didn't. I wondered, for you, on your behalf. He paused. You deserve something that's clean, not complicated by the fact that I work for you, or that the city watched you hire me, or that there's a profile piece somewhere that people can point to. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, Crescent Avenue moved through its Saturday night. A car passing, someone's music briefly audible, the low ambient pulse of the city. Can I tell you something? She said. Yeah. My therapist, I've been seeing her since April now. She said something in our third session that I've thought about a lot. Victoria turned to face him more fully. She said I'd spent my whole adult life constructing conditions under which it was safe to trust people. Building the controlled environment first, vetting the variables, eliminating risk. A pause. She said that's exactly backward. That trust isn't something you build toward. It's something you practice before you feel ready. He looked at her. I told her about the park, Victoria said, about the paper bags and the coffee and the mornings. She asked me why I'd accepted help from a stranger when I never accepted help from anyone I knew. She paused. I thought about it for a week before I had an answer. What was the answer? Because you didn't ask me to trust you, she said. You just acted trustworthy, every morning, without needing me to acknowledge it or reciprocate or explain myself. She held his eyes. That's not something you can construct. That's just who someone is. Logan was quiet. I've been in relationships that were strategic, Victoria continued. Not cynically. I didn't plan them that way. But I'm someone who plans things. And I'm someone who exists in environments where almost everything is also a professional calculation. And at some point, the personal and professional were so layered I stopped being able to find the line. She paused. You're the first person in a very long time who made the line obvious. Because I was just a man in a park. Because you were just yourself. She looked at him plainly, nothing held back. I don't want to manage this. I've been managing everything for 14 months, and I'm tired of managing things I should just be feeling. He reached across the couch and took her hand. Not a dramatic gesture, just that. His hand over hers, the same uncomplicated way Emma took her hand in the park. Victoria looked down at their hands and then up at him, and the thing he'd seen in January in the park, that brief opening, that look of being caught off guard by something that mattered, was on her face now, fully, not caught in time. I'm not going anywhere, he said. That's all I've got. I'm not a plan. I'm not a framework. I'm a guy with a kid and a 12-year-old car and a job I'm figuring out. He paused. But I'm here, consistently, that I can promise. That's more than you think, she said quietly. I know. He looked at her. I meant it when I said I'm not going anywhere, but I also meant it when I said you deserve something clean. So whatever this is, we do it right, openly. If there are board members or journalists or colleagues who want to have an opinion about it, they can have their opinion, but we don't hide it and we don't apologize for it, and we don't let other people's narrative become ours. She studied him. That's going to be complicated. Yeah. There will be a period where people talk. There's already been a period where people talked. He held her gaze. Did it change anything that mattered? She thought about it honestly. No. Then we're okay. She looked at him for a long moment, the same look she'd turned on him the first morning, that quiet, assessing quality, except this time there was nothing to assess. She'd already done the assessing. This was something else. Okay, she said. She didn't move her hand. The Cohen litigation resolved in September, not with a verdict, with a settlement, which was how these things usually ended when one side had run out of viable moves. The terms were confidential, but the outcome was not. Richard Cohen resigned from all positions connected to Hartwell Corporation and its subsidiaries. The general counsel who had fed him information faced a separate professional conduct proceeding, and the two board members who had aligned with Cohen had been gone since January. Victoria's attorney sent her a one-line text at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. It's done. She was in a budget meeting when it came through. She read it, set her phone face down, and finished the meeting. Logan was 3 floors down when she appeared in his office doorway 40 minutes later, and he looked up from his desk and read her face in the first second. Done, he said. Done. He stood up. He crossed the room and she met him halfway, and he put his arms around her, in his office, in the Hartwell building, where anyone could walk past the glass wall. And she pressed her face briefly against his shoulder and exhaled, one long breath, like she'd been holding it for the better part of a year. He held her for a moment. That was all. Just that. When she stepped back, her expression was composed, but her eyes were bright in the way they got when she was feeling something she was working not to show. She straightened her jacket. She looked at him. I have a board call in 20 minutes, she said. Go. I want to tell Emma tonight. She'll want to celebrate. Her idea of celebrating is waffles. I know. Victoria almost smiled. I already know that. She moved toward the door, then paused. Logan. Yeah. Thank you for the 20 minutes. You don't have to thank me for 20 minutes. I know. But she looked at him the way she looked at him now, openly, without the managed distance. I'm thanking you anyway. She went to her board call. He went back to his desk. Outside the window, Millhaven moved through its Tuesday without particular awareness that anything had changed, and the sun came through the glass in the specific flat angle of early September. He sat at his desk and thought about a Tuesday morning almost exactly a year ago, when he'd rounded a line of elm trees and stopped walking and watched a woman he didn't know become a different version of herself, and felt, even then, that it was something worth remembering. They told Emma that evening, over waffles. Victoria explained it in the straightforward way she explained things, that there had been people trying to cause problems for her company, and now those problems were resolved, and everything was stable. Emma listened with a waffle on her fork, and then said, So the bad guys lost? Yes? Good. Emma ate the waffle. Were you scared? At certain points, yes. But you kept going. Victoria looked at her. I kept going. Emma nodded, satisfied. This was consistent with her understanding of how things worked. You were scared sometimes and you kept going anyway, and eventually the thing resolved. She'd said as much in a frozen park in January to a woman she'd known for 2 months and already trusted completely, and the world had turned out to confirm her position. Emma was not surprised. She'd been right, and she knew she'd been right, and she returned to her waffle with the serenity of the correctly certain. Logan watched this and felt something shift in his chest, the particular lightness of a weight that had been present so long you'd stopped noticing it, lifting. Can I show you something? Emma said to Victoria. She disappeared into her room and came back with a piece of origami paper, dark blue, carefully selected, and unfolded it on the table with the setup of someone who'd been planning this for a while. I'm going to make you a new one, Emma said. A proper crane, not one of the practice ones. She began to fold. Victoria watched with her full attention. Logan watched Victoria. The apartment was warm with the last of the summer, the windows open to the September evening, the city doing its usual things outside, unhurried, continuous, entirely unaware. Emma's crane was not perfect. The left wing folded a millimeter too far, and the tail had a slight lean and the neck was maybe a shade too long, but she'd been practicing for months, and the difference from the early ones was real and visible. She held it out to Victoria. Victoria took it, turned it in her hands the way she had the first imperfect crane, the one she'd made herself on a Saturday morning in May. She looked at it for a moment. This one goes on my desk, she said. Emma looked at the dragon, already there in imagination. Next to the horse drawing. Next to the horse drawing. Emma appeared satisfied with the arrangement. She went to put her origami supplies away, and Logan and Victoria were left at the table in the quiet that followed Emma's exits, which were always the same, full presence and then gone, a sudden absence that made rooms seem larger. Victoria set the crane down carefully on the table in front of her. She looked at it for a moment. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. I've said that to you before. I keep saying it. I know. I'm better at it than I was. She looked up. I want you to know that. I notice the difference. I notice it too. My therapist says I use professional language when I'm trying to say personal things. She paused. So I'm trying to just say the personal thing. She looked at him. You changed something for me. Not just the park, not just the job, Not just the fact that you showed up. You made me believe that being known by someone wasn't automatically a liability. A pause. I decided, at some point I can't locate exactly, that letting people see me was how you got hurt, that the control was the protection. She looked at her hands, and then you sat next to me on a bench on Christmas morning and just talked to me, like I was a person, like nothing I'd built around myself was actually there. Logan was quiet. I still do it, she said. The control thing. I still go cold sometimes. I close doors without meaning to. I know. It's not going to stop overnight. I know that too. He reached across the table and touched the crane lightly with one finger. Victoria, I don't need overnight. I need consistent. He met her eyes. You've been consistent since September of last year, through everything. He paused. That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing. She looked at him for a long moment. I love Emma, she said. Simple as that. Not as a preamble, not as a way into something else. Just the fact of it, placed on the table beside the crane. She loves you, he said. She decided in October. She didn't tell me until December, but I already knew. How did you know? She stopped calling you the woman on the bench and started saying Victoria, the way she says my name and her mother's name. Like you were just a person who existed in her life. He looked at the crane on the table. Emma doesn't give that casually, and Victoria was quiet. Neither do I, Logan said. She looked at him. I love you, he said. That's the personal thing, in case you needed it stated plainly. She held very still for a moment, the same quality of stillness she'd had on the bench in all those cold mornings, except what was underneath it now was different. Not endurance, not waiting, something opening rather than holding closed. Logan, she said, yeah, I love you too. She said it the same way she said everything she meant. No approach shot, no hedging, just the thing. I've been trying to say it correctly for 2 months. It was correct. It felt abrupt. It was fine. He smiled. It was you. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but belonged to the same family. She looked at the crane on the table and then out at the September evening through the open window and then back at him, and she let her face do what it was doing without managing it, which was something he'd watched her learn and which still moved him every time. The following Saturday, they went back to Alderman Square. No particular reason. Emma had asked if they could go, and then added that she wanted to bring the leftover bread from breakfast to the pigeons, which was not the real reason, but was a good cover. Logan suspected Emma had her own sense of the completeness of the gesture, that she understood, in the way she understood things, that it mattered to return to the place where the thing had started. The morning was cool in the specific way of early fall, that first shift of air that reminded you winter was coming but hadn't yet committed. The elm trees were just starting to turn, edges of yellow gold beginning to show in the green, and the fountain was running, the same as always, the same as it had run all spring and summer, the same continuous, indifferent fact of it. Emma ran ahead to the fountain. Victoria and Logan came through the entrance side by side, coffee in hand. He'd made it this time, not the bodega, a thermos each, and they stopped at the near bench without discussing it. The far bench was empty. Someone had repainted it over the summer, the weathered wood now a clean dark green. Logan looked at it. They painted it, he said. I know. Victoria looked at it too. I called the Parks Department in May. Anonymous donor, replacement materials. She paused. It seemed, I don't know, it seemed like it should be maintained. He looked at her. Don't make it a thing, she said. I'm not making it a thing. You have the face you make when you're Victoria. He looked at her with the full warmth of it, not held back. Thank you. For the bench. She was quiet for a moment, looked at the fountain, where Emma was tearing bread into precise pieces and distributing them to a growing assembly of pigeons with the focused diplomacy of a UN official. It was a good bench, Victoria said. It was. They sat down on the near one. The park moved around them. A dog walker, a jogger. The old man with his thermos and his notebook on the far bench, who came every Saturday and whom Logan had never spoken to, but whose presence had become a kind of constant. The elm trees turned in a slight breeze. Emma negotiated pigeon politics with both hands occupied. The fountain ran. Logan thought about the September morning 14 months ago when he'd stood at the bodega counter with 2 coffees and a brown paper bag, and the mild, practical impulse of a man who'd noticed someone was cold and decided to do something about it. Not a grand decision, not a calculated one. Just the small, ordinary choice of a person trying to act decently in the direction of another person. He thought about what it had become. Not what he'd planned, because he hadn't planned anything, but what it had turned into anyway. This bench, this morning, this woman beside him, his daughter's voice carrying across the park, an argument with a particularly assertive pigeon. There was something in that worth sitting with. The fact that the largest things in a life could arrive through the smallest doors. A paper bag, a cold morning, a gesture made without expectation of return. That kindness, the genuine kind, the kind without a ledger, had a way of moving in directions you couldn't predict and couldn't plan and couldn't manufacture. You either did it or you didn't. You either showed up or you didn't. He'd shown up. And she had shown up, in every way and through everything. And Emma had put origami cranes on a shelf and called someone's name the way she called the names of people who mattered. And here they were. It wasn't a perfect story. There was nothing clean about the path. The months of cold mornings and the board crisis and the profile piece and the panic attack in a parking garage and all the moments where it could have broken and almost did. Victoria was still learning to put the weight down. He was still learning the scale of the work he'd stepped into. There were things between them that would take time and patience and more than a few conversations they hadn't had yet. But they were here, on a bench in Alderman Square on a September morning, with coffee and the elm trees turning and Emma's voice in the background, and the specific, uncomplicated fact of being 2 people who had decided to keep showing up for each other. Victoria was looking at the fountain. The light caught the water in the way it did in the mornings. The flat early gold of it, the same light that had come through on all those autumn and winter and spring mornings when everything was different, and also, he understood now, already moving toward this. "Hey," he said. She turned. He held up his coffee thermos. She looked at it for a moment, and then she held up hers, and they touched them together once, not ceremoniously, not with any particular weight, just the small gesture of 2 people marking a moment without needing it to be more than it was. Emma looked over from the fountain. "Are you doing a toast?" "Kind of," Logan said. "To what?" He looked at Victoria. She looked at him. A beat passed between them. The kind that held a year of mornings, a year of cold air and paper bags and hard things gotten through, a year of 2 people becoming known to each other in the way that actually counts. "Just a showing up," he said. Emma considered this with a piece of bread in her hand. "That's a weird toast," she said. "But, okay." She raised the bread in the direction of the fountain. The pigeons watched with interest. Victoria made the sound that was near to a laugh. Logan made the actual laugh. The fountain ran. The elm trees turned in the breeze, that first gold creeping into the green, the season changing the way seasons changed, slowly, then all at once, and with no announcement at all. The morning held them, and then moved on, the way mornings do, carrying everything forward into whatever came next, not neatly, not cleanly, but carrying it. That was enough. That was in the end exactly enough.